Before we get started, I want to talk a little bit about origins. And when I say origins, I'm talking about whether you started off in the film side of things or in the video digital side, because they both send you off on a slightly different trajectory. If you started off in film, you tended to have more of a photographic background. If you started off in video or digital, you tended to have more of a technical and engineering style background. And the guys who came up, like myself, through film, have a little bit of an advantage when it comes to the digital side of things, because we've got a little bit better understanding of the entire pathway or the workflow from prep all the way through to your final product, going through color grading and then out into release printing. So what I want to do is I want to just talk a little bit about the film side of things so that you get a bit of a picture of where all the things that I'm going to be talking about are coming from. Now, originally, if you were working in film, to develop a visual style for a picture, you had basically two film stocks, you had Kodak and Fuji. Now, within those film stocks, there were multiple ASA ratings. So, for example, we had 100, 200, 250, 320, 400, and 500 ASA films. Now, we had those in both stocks, and they were basically the choices you had as a cinematographer on which you would build a visual style. And the film stock contributed a large amount to the visual style because that was basically your palette when you the palette that you were going to build on. Now, for example, if you had you wanted a story that was going to be high contrast and with saturated colors, then you might go for a slower film stock like 100 ASA, because that was higher contrast and gave you more saturated colors. If you want something that was a little bit less saturated and a little bit softer and had lower contrast, then you might go for a higher stock like a 400 or a 500 ASA stock. If you wanted something that had warmer tones, you might go for Kodak. If you wanted something cooler tones, you might go for the Fuji. As a cinematographer, your job was to know all that stuff. And the way you learned all that stuff was by doing loads and loads of testing. So every time a new film stock came out, we would get the film stock and we'd go out and we'd shoot emulsion tests and exposure tests so that we knew how far over and under exposed we could go, what would happen to colors on over and under exposure, what would happen to contrast on over and under exposure, and you would do that in each brand and also at each ASA rating. So you had a very good understanding of how each of those film stocks was going to react in any given situation. So then when you picked that stock for your to start developing your visual style, you knew exactly where you were going. When you get to the digital world, it's exactly the same. There are different brands, and within those brands there are different ASA ratings. And so you've got to understand where the parameters are going to fall within each of those brands and within the ASA ratings that you've got. Now, a lot of the cameras are set up, most of them for 800 ASA, and to give you a perfect image at 800 ASA and give you the maximum dynamic range, which is 12 or 13 or 14 or 15 stops, whatever that might happen to be, that the manufacturers dictate. But you need to know how far you can push that camera and whether you can push it into different areas. Now, I don't always shoot at 800 ASA, and the reason I don't is because I don't want to be piling filters on to get to a low enough f-stop, especially on day exteriors. And so I'll shoot at 400 ASA, or I might shoot at 320 or at 160. It just depends on what I need. But at each of those ASA ratings, there is a different contrast, a different dynamic range. and the colors will react slightly differently. And it's my job as a cinematographer to understand what those differences are, so that if I do go from 800 to 160, then I know exactly what's going to happen. Now, sure, you can say, well, all you've got to do is look at the monitor and you know. That's true, but if I'm doing prep, I need to know in prep that the style that I'm going to be going for in the show that I'll be shooting is actually going to work, and I don't have a camera and I don't have a 4K monitor to go and look at when I'm doing prep. That's got to come from here. So I need to still have a really good understanding of how that camera is going to react in any given situation. Now, the question is, why do I need to know that? Why can't I just go on set, start lighting and go off happily into the sunset? Well, the reason is that we get too stuck in our ways of relying on what we're seeing on that monitor. And if we're only lighting from the monitor, we don't know shot to shot where we are. So every time you move around, sure, you're creating great images by looking at the monitor and lighting off the monitor, but you're not creating images that are giving you a coherent style. So the problem is, if you start relying solely on the monitor instead of on your understanding of how the camera and the different ASA or ISO ratings are going to react, you can easily get lost in terms of visual style. Your visual style will start to drift, your contrast will start to drift all over the place, because you're not keeping track of where all those ratios are going to fall. So one of the things we're going to be doing in this is I'm going to be talking about how you go about establishing that visual style up front, knowing exactly where all your ratios are going to fall, and then being able to walk on set and maintain a constant visual style day after day after day as you go through a project, without any drift in contrast, without any drift in colors, so that you are always in control of the image.